welcome to this edition of Silicon Grapevine. My name is Nitin Dahad, and today my guest is Sakya Dasgupta. Now, he is, you'll find, if you look at Google search, is known as a researcher in AI and scientist, but he's actually also an entrepreneur and founder and CEO of a company called EdgeCortix. Hello, Sakya.
Hi, Nitin. Thanks for
Good. Sakya, let's maybe just let's start about what you're doing right now, EdgeCortix. So it sort of stems from your whole background in AI research and sort of brain. Yeah, I call it brain-inspired computing, but I think it's more that sort of neuromorphic computing. Just tell us the formation of EdgeCortix and how that came about and what you're doing, and then we'll go into a little bit of your journey.
Sure, absolutely. Very happy. So, at EdgeCortix, let me just start with what we're doing a little bit first, and then I'll walk back in time. So, our primary focus is to build really energy efficient, power efficient systems for running AI applications, especially recent models like generative AI, multimodal, and bring that to power constrained devices like Edge, etc., which is not very different from the brain, given that the brain is extremely constrained in terms of the power. It's around 15 to 20 watts, but it clearly, even now, we cannot match the intelligence of a typical human brain. So, EdgeCortix, with that goal of power efficient AI processing at the edge, we started in 2019, so roughly around 5 years. We are headquartered in Japan, in Tokyo, where I'm speaking to you from, but we are pretty much a global company. We operate out of the US, Singapore, and recently we kickstarted a new center in India, in Hyderabad.
Okay.
To tell you about how we, kind of the background of EdgeCortix, I think I have to go back a little bit in time. When I was doing my PhD at one of the Max Plancks in Germany, the key area of focus was how do you take inspiration from the brain, as you call it, brain-inspired computing, both from algorithms perspective as well as kind of the efficient hardware substrate that it has, and be able to apply that to systems. And we were doing that on robotic systems like walking machines. And when you're on a robotic system, it's very constrained in power, size, area. It's not unlike a typical edge environment.
Yes.
And lo and behold, that's kind of a focus now. The critical question was, how do we make the algorithms and software efficient and make it work across standard hardware? That was the first thing that I was trying to solve. And then much later, years later, when I was at IBM Research, I came to kind of explore similar kind of questions that, again, if you scale up the algorithm problem, you run latest deep learning algorithms, a lot more compute heavy, power hungry in the data center. How do you bring that to the edge? And so that's kind of the, I would say, starting point for EdgeCortix, to be able to solve that problem. And hopefully someday we will be able to achieve the level of efficiency that the brain does.
Okay. Well, we'll go into a little bit about your journey. And I think what we talk about in inspiration, I think you started, actually you were inspired by your mother, who was a computer science professor, and you wrote your own game in, I think, in GW Basic, something like Tetris, at 9 years old. Tell us about that journey and sort of what made you do that.
That is correct. Wow. Yes. So I think my mother, definitely, I've had a number of inspirations over the years, but I would say my mother was my first inspiration in terms of, she's not only computer science, kind of, I would call her a computer scientist in that sense. So early on, I grew up in Calcutta, in India, and was exposed to, at that time, if I recall correctly, MS-DOS, very early days of computers, at least in India. And games was a major part of it. So I started getting exposed to different types of DOS games, which I found extremely interesting, given the limited amount of graphics, but you could add a lot of intelligence. So once I learned my first programming language, I believe it was GW Basic at that time. In fact, the first major project I ever did, and this is, I'm maybe 9 or 10 years old, was writing a Tetris game. At that time, if I remember correctly, there was also a Nintendo Game Boy that was there, which also had a similar Tetris game. So I was trying to kind of reproduce that myself. And, that really got me started with computer science. And much later, I found myself doing computer engineering and kind of pursuing that in a journey. In fact, my foray into AI or machine learning was through games. There were a lot of games that I was exposed to that was applying AI algorithms, and I pursued that for quite a long time until my master's, trying to understand the use of machine learning in games, and then how do we bring that to real world kind of devices that we interact with.
Yeah, and I think that sort of took you from doing your bachelor's in India to going to the master's in Edinburgh, which is renowned for that kind of work there as well. So and then the Max Planck Institute. So I think you basically built your whole sort of foundation for doing all this AI research that then you carried on doing with IBM.
That's exactly right. In fact, after I finished my bachelor's, I actually joined Microsoft for some time, and this was pre-Azure days as well. But what I was really attracted towards was to do machine learning, and at that time, at least, I was not getting enough opportunity. So I decided that let me go and pursue a master's. And during those days, there were not many universities offering AI masters in AI, and Edinburgh were one of the few places.
Okay.
So
what year was that? What year was that?
This is 2006 to 2007. Yeah. So pre-deep learning boom, AlexNet was not yet published. So when I was at Edinburgh, I was actually focusing on Gaussian processes and Bayesian computing systems. But then one of the professors kind of got me into neural computation. And one of my all-time, talking about inspirations, alongside my mother, I would say von Neumann has always been quite an inspiring figure for me. And in fact, von Neumann also in early days has talked about kind of brain-inspired computing, and how we need to be able to get there with hardware as well.
Yes.
So somehow I found myself pursuing a PhD in that area. So I was never so much a researcher as much, though Google says that, I would say I've always been more of an engineer, like creating systems. And I think the entrepreneurship side also always existed. The idea was to implement something and make a functional business out of it. And much, years later, in 2019, I think the timing was correct. There was a huge tailwind happening especially in US, I would say in China as well, and many of the other parts of the world. Japan was a little bit slow, but it was a clear indicator that hardware for AI was going to become a big thing. It is absolutely important, and I could relate with it in terms of the challenges I had faced with robotic systems and others in constrained environments. So we started 2019, the company, and
I mean, how did you end up in Japan, of all places? I mean, that's also an interesting story in itself.
That itself is as well, I would say. So I think I keep getting that question, why Japan? I think one of the unique non-Japanese who are running a company in Japan. It was a mixture. So I think my PhD kind of brought me to Japan through an organization called RIKEN, if you know them, who have the fastest supercomputer in the world for a time, at least Fugaku. That's how I actually moved to Japan, where I was again focusing on brain-inspired computing and how do you build systems out of it. And then, I have always been attracted to Japanese culture. So that's how I ended up here. But interestingly, being in Japan, working at IBM Research as well, gave me an exposure towards the demand for AI as well as semiconductors. Unfortunately, in the last 10 to 20 years, the focus on semiconductors in Japan had slowed down.
Yeah.
But I felt that was really an opportunity in 2019. So we jumped in and started the company, and lo and behold, we started 2019. I think 2021, TSMC announced the Kumamoto plant, and 2022, we had foundries talking about 2 nanometers. So clearly, there's a revival of sorts of semiconductors in Japan.
Right. And I mean, culturally, I think it must be very different to sort of what you had in India and then Europe. And it's sort of like all your counterparts are all in the US.
Absolutely. I think, it has been challenging as well as extremely rewarding. Japan is the 6th country, if you believe, that I'm living in now. So I've kind of been a little bit of a globetrotter in that sense. But Japan really has an eclectic mix of kind of, today at least, a strong government support. There is a growing startup community. There is a lot of influx of capital from investors across the world globally. So there are US investors, European investors investing in Japan. And you can have a Silicon Valley style company. So at EdgeCortix, we pretty much run a company where English is the common language, and we have people from 10 or 11 different countries. So extremely an eclectic mix. And that's kind of reflective of today's Japan, I would say.
Okay. And I mean, just change a little bit to sort of what are the things that you think you've sort of greatest achievements so far? I know you're still young in your career, but what are you really proud of in your career?
I would say the first thing that I was immensely proud of was the first game that I wrote, as we talked about, because I recall the amount of joy that I felt from that. But years later, of course, in terms of my own journey, I'm one of the co-inventors of a concept called dynamic Boltzmann machines, which has been heavily used. I invented that when I was at IBM Research, and it has been heavily used in time series processing. At that time, LSTMs were the norm in the industry, but we were focusing on how do you make it low latency, significantly low latency and low power, perform with sequences, which has implications much later now towards temporal programming with other types of models, latest LSTMs, as well as current generation transformers. So I'm very proud of that. And, we had a very successful application of that in business, in finance domain. Prior to starting EdgeCortix, that's what I was doing, and was a very successful endeavor in its own right. And then coming from that at EdgeCortix, that was really the starting point, where I'd worked for a long period of time on software-first design of hardware systems. And I would say we are very immensely proud of the way we have been able to kind of achieve that in a relatively short period of time, alongside some of our peers in the AI industry. I think the established norm has always been hardware first. You start with the processor architecture design, and then software becomes an afterthought. You kind of go and solve the compiler problem.
Yeah.
Me, coming from a software background, as well as many of the team, we started with that software mindset. First, compiler became the prominent aspect, and then we built our architecture out of that. And so I think that we take quite a lot of pride in that aspect, where we can now see we can achieve really significantly better performance per watt compared to many other competing, let's say, general purpose architectures.
Okay. The big thing right now is AI and high performance compute, and what's your view on sort of where we're heading? I think part of your story is, well, obviously, everybody's story is AI at the edge and small language models. But what's your perspective on all of this, being somebody who's a real scholar in this area as well?
I don't know if I can still call myself a scholar in that. I'm not an active scientist anymore. But I think the way I see from the perspective of EdgeCortix and, where we are seeing the industry moving, I think we are just still scratching the surface when it comes to latest AI models. I think today's transformer models are great, but I truly believe that there's going to be an evolution continuously on those types of models. And I think the endeavor is towards getting a lot more brain-like, at least in terms of efficiency. That's the ultimate goal. And I think steadily the industry is making headway towards that, where today's hardware that we are creating, it will be not completely neuromorphic, but even the neuromorphic hardware that we have today, event-driven, is not completely suited, in my opinion, to brain-like efficiency. So it's a middle ground. And we as a company also, we are steadily moving towards that and innovating. How do we make it a lot more malleable, so to speak, plastic, so that it can adapt to the changes of the changing AI landscape? And I think that's what I expect a move to happen. Today's very fixed architectures, where once you bring a chip to the market and the AI model has changed, it's going to be very difficult to adapt. And general purpose hardware, by definition, no free lunches in this world. Yep. So by definition, is going to be much less efficient. So I think we will move towards a little bit more adaptable, domain-specific architectures with the software first.
I think adaptable, domain-specific, reconfigurable. I think those are the areas that we're heading towards, I guess, to make that efficient.
To a certain extent, we have tried. The industry has tried things like FPGAs or field programmable gate arrays, which are completely reconfigurable. But then again, you leave a lot on the table. What we have seen is that data flow architectures in the industry, many have called it CGRAs, coarse-grained reconfigurable arrays. So there's a middle ground, and we as a company, we are also in a similar space, and there is a lot of innovations that can happen there where you can get towards brain-like efficiency. And when you combine that with latest things that are happening in the system scaling side, for example, not just monolithic dies, looking at multi-die disaggregation in combination of system scaling efficiency and this kind of architectural efficiency, I think that's where the industry needs to move to be able to achieve a lot better power efficiency. And we as a company, you will hear a lot more from us. We are also moving in that direction.
Okay, let's move to a little bit about you personal side. What's a piece of technology that you can't do without? What do you use in your daily life? We think, okay, you really wouldn't be able to function if you weren't, or just what your favorite piece of technology?
It's very interesting. So there are two things that I absolutely cannot live without. The first thing is actually not electronic at all. I guess it's partially electronic. So I love watches. So, and I cannot live without a watch.
Okay.
And the best watch that I like to use is not a smartwatch, but rather a mechanical or electromechanical watch, which uses essentially silicon inside, alongside the mechanical systems. I definitely cannot do without that, and I find that really a marvel to look at all the time.
Yeah.
And the second is perhaps, unfortunately, the smartphone, given the lives that we lead. So those would be the two things I would imagine. And then, I still like to program. You would find it hard to believe that I still try to squeeze in time and write a piece of code on our hardware whenever I can. So I would say the third technology would be just standard programming languages.
Okay. Any new games you've written which people might want to play?
It's been a while. I think there's a collection of different games that I've worked on for a number of years, but it hasn't been the case. Unfortunately, I haven't found the time to work on a game recently myself. But I think the closest that we came is applying reinforcement learning with our own hardware, and essentially using simulated environments for example, typical self-driving cars or autonomous driving. There's a data problem. So that's something that I've been quite enamored by, looking at using simulation to generate a lot of data, but then use hardware like we create to speed up that, or some part of that simulation, which runs reinforcement learning, for example, can run on hardware like ours. So that's something that still exploring to a certain extent, but I would say not as actively given my full-time day-to-day responsibilities as a CEO.
Okay. And then what kind of hobbies do you have apart from programming? Anything interesting? Do you go, what do you do in Tokyo?
The Tokyo is fantastic if you're an outdoors person. And I do like to kind of explore quite a bit. So both my wife and I, we tend to kind of go out hiking quite often. So when I was much more younger than that I'm now, I was into bouldering and climbing. So I didn't get that much opportunity, but we tend to hike, I would say, or go for runs. Tokyo is fantastic for going for a run at night and just soaking in.
Wow. Okay. Well, the Tokyo seems to be like a city like doesn't sleep here. If you watch the media over here in the West, so it seems to be very active all night long.
It's a very eclectic city, but I would say it has multiple shades to it. It has a mixture of complete modern, as well as it preserves, the history as well.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, behind me you see this Sakura, which is also the name or inspiration of our hardware.
Okay.
And that really stems from this Japanese culture as well, kind of this renewed joy and inspiration, which comes every year and then kind of brings a new outlook to life and industry. And that's kind of the ethos for our own products and work culture as well.
Very good. Final question, so what would you tell a young Sakya what you know now in terms of life advice, or how would you mentor a young Sakya?
That's such a tough question. I have two little kids and I constantly ponder that question. But I think the first thing that I would say is learn to fail and fail fast. quite often. And I think all the little failures that I've had in my life has, taught me immense lessons. So, that's in our company also, we tend to take, another way of looking at failing fast is taking risks. As entrepreneurs, we are always taking risk, and internally as a company culture as well, we tend to kind of think fast, or rather think big, implement fast, and then scale. So you take a risk, and then you fail, you learn from that, and you accelerate and you grow. So that's an ethos. I would definitely share that with the next generation if I had the opportunity myself. Another thing that I would, caution people, to be honest, is, historically when we started the company, we were kind of bootstrapped, as well as we never took funding from any venture capitals for a very long period of time. In fact, up until the first few $5 million or so that we raised was completely friends and family, ourselves, angel investors. That gave us a lot of ability to control the way we wanted to grow the company, but also it brings challenges. So if in hindsight, I would say, if you find the right partner, if you're starting a company, and, we are very lucky to have got great investors today, it's good to find those kind of investors and work together with them, because that might help the journey. So that's another lesson that we have learned, which has made us stronger in a matter today.
And in terms of like the learning side, obviously those are work and career, but in terms of other, on the learning and the life journey.
Life journey, I think I'm still young comparatively. So I think there's a lot more wisdom to come from, kind of learn. I would say as I said, failing in general and then learning from that is definitely a life lesson that I've had several years. Another thing that I think about intelligence, which is very interesting, is there's a book that I read when I was in college. It's from Rolf Pfeiffer, if I remember correctly, how the mind shapes, or how the body shapes the mind. Which is very interesting, which talks about embodied intelligence, the aspect of your the hardware environment, or the kind of the body that you're in, plays as much role in intelligence as the software substrate. And that's kind of a life lesson. So you can think of perspective of how you kind of the company that you keep, the way you work has an impact of the way you think, and at the same time you can bring that to the systems that we engineer. Sometimes we have to look at it from the perspective of how that system is going to get implemented from the system perspective, and take a lot more higher up look rather than the micro side of what the semiconductor does.
Interesting. I mean, there's a CEO who's talking about embodied AI at the moment, who's in this autonomous driving area. But I think it's quite interesting that embodied intelligence, I think, is something that is going to be happening more and more.
Absolutely. See, I would like to think that we are in the business of creating or enabling intelligent systems. That's the whole idea, the reason why we are creating software and hardware. So we want to make a lot more power efficient and sustainable and green. But the ultimate goal is that these power efficient systems should be a lot more intelligent than what we have today. And I think we constantly think about those kind of challenges, embodied intelligence, as well as not just making everything vision centric, make it a lot more multimodal. And the great thing is today with recent transformer models, we are now at least scratching the surface of bringing such multimodal systems alive in a lot more efficient.
Well, Sakya, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitin. Lovely questions, I must say. It was a great speaking with you.
Thank you.